Vice President Joe Biden nixing a presidential run this week and saying the parties have to work together for America.
I don't believe, like some do, that it's naive to talk to Republicans. I don't think we should look at Republicans as our enemies. They are our opposition. They're not our enemies.
I wonder if he was talking about Hillary Clinton saying this.
Which enemy are you most proud of?
Well, in addition to the NRA, the health insurance companies, the drug companies, the Iranians, probably the Republicans.
Iranians, Republicans. So who has the better message to help our nation and our economy? Hi, everybody. I'm David Aslan. Welcome to Forbes on Fox. Let's go in focus with Steve Forbes, Rich Karlgaard, Elizabeth McDonald, Sabrina Schaefer, John Tamny, and Bruce Japsen. So, Steve, isn't working with a loyal opposition a better way of doing business than equating the opposition with terrorists?
Yes, unfortunately, Biden, I think, was also addressing this to his boss, who wants it his way or the highway. He refused to compromise, for example, on Obamacare, on the whole thing on the stimulus package, on corporate tax cuts. He wants a tax increase. So you have to have two sides willing to cut a deal, as Reagan did in the mid-1980s when he got those fabulous tax cuts. But this guy, President Obama, he's not willing to compromise. So I wish Biden had been successful in having Obama obey what he suggested.
All right. Well, John Tamny, you have a slightly different view about the goodness for America and our economy of politicians working together. Explain.
Well, yeah, I think friendship and compromise and working together are vastly overrated when it comes to politics. This is what got us Sarbanes-Oxley, that turned into a situation whereby we made CEOs criminals. It got us the bailouts of banks that weakened the economy and weakened the banking sector. It annually gets us spending bills that rob us of liberty and reduce economic growth. It's much better when they're not working together because they're not doing us harm.
Okay, but EMAC, it also got us the Reagan tax cuts, which of course were cut as a result of cooperation between the two parties. Clinton's welfare policies, which with Newt Gingrich in the House, resulted in ending a lot of welfare dependency programs.
Yeah, that's right. And, you know, the problem is if you have continued political gridlock, then everybody looks to the Federal Reserve as the economic savior. It's sort of like we're suffering from post-bubble amnesia. We forget what happens when the Federal Reserve is a go-to place for fixing the country, and it shouldn't be. Listen, I get it. We don't want bad laws passed, and that is the checks and balances that we need. But I think we do need to get the country moving again. There's too much gridlock, too much incumbency as well, and half of retiring congressmen becoming lobbyists. That's part of the problem, too.
And Sabrina, were it not for this war, essentially, between these two enemies, as Hillary put it, we would have, for example, had Simpson-Bowles. We had the Simpson-Bowles plan for lowering tax rates. We would have had a top rate of 24%, only 3 rates, much simpler program, kind of like a Steve Forbes flat tax, although there were 3 rates. But we didn't have it because everybody was screaming at each other.
Right. I mean, certainly there's certain, I think that might be the exception, not the rule, David. I'm sort of with John on this, that we want to be careful. The more that there is consensus, the more that we grow government and we diminish our freedoms. At the same time, we have to remember that the country was formed on debate, and that back and forth is very important. It's very healthy, in effect, for a democracy. What worries me most, and I think this is what Vice President Biden was sort of alluding to, is that when the political divisiveness becomes something that Americans sort of begin to own, that they are divisive with one another, most Americans don't have a sort of a coherent political ideology. Most Americans are somewhere in the middle, and this kind of political divisiveness actually draws them farther away from the political process, and I don't think that's a good thing.
And, Rich, that is why, I think, anyway, our founding fathers worked so hard to get the idea of compromise into the way our political system works, because most of the people are not either completely on one side or completely on the other.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And let's add in the fact that Russia and China and ISIS and other organizations like that look at our dysfunction, they interpret it as weakness, and they get very aggressive in the world as a result. And then we cease becoming a beacon for everybody who yearns for democracy and prosperity. But look, I don't think you can force consensus. I think that you have to get the American people to demand it, and that's what we're not doing. There's not a candidate out there on either side that is making the convincing case for peace and prosperity.
Well, Bruce, as somebody who's probably more on the Democratic side than anybody else here, I'm just wondering, with Hillary and Joe Biden, which side do you go with?
Well, I think since Hillary said that, I mean, she withstood those withering questions for 11 hours, and she didn't even sweat at the Benghazi hearing, whereas Trey Gowdy looked like Albert Brooks in broadcast news. But I would say that, you know, Hillary is probably more correct, because I think that whichever party controls both the White House and Congress is going to get something done, because I think the ship has sailed since Reagan was in there, and I think that there's just too much gridlock.
So you think, just to put a fine point on it, Bruce, you think Joe Biden is passé, his ideas?
Well, he grew up in an environment where he had friends on both sides of the aisle, and unfortunately things are so toxic in Washington that it doesn't work. I mean, maybe we could return to that,
so,
which
Steve,
would be good.
are those days gone for good?
No, we have a toxic environment because we have a toxic president who refuses to compromise, won't create consensus around the country. And so if you get a president who gets a consensus, as Reagan did in 1980, and then you can get big positive things done.
EMAC?
Yeah, and you know, when you even talk to Democrats, they will say privately they've never seen such a divisive president in their lifetime. And he is divisive on so many levels. And once he leaves office, the fear is that Hillary will continue that, given her comments the other night.
So, Sabrina, can we get back eventually to the days when people got together to work together for programs that really did help the economy in the country?
Yes, David, actually, I think that this is where leadership is so important, and creativity. I think one of the challenges is that, especially on the Republican side, they look at the big, you know, one-size-fits-all type of programs that Democrats put forth, and they say, well, that's ridiculous. We don't want that. There are no problems. Everything is fine. The market will handle it. Well, the reality is there are people who are hurting. There are people who could benefit from help from Washington, and we have to think more creatively about market-based prescriptions that would help those people. And if we do that, I bet we can close that gap.
Hold on. Go ahead, John.
But the electorate does not want this. It's pretty wise, and it's voted for gridlock with good reason. Can we remember how incompetent George W. Bush was as president? We also agree that Obama's been a pretty lousy president, too. Why would we trust either political party at this point? And I think that's what the electorate's saying.
But, John, do you really think that the electorate voted for gridlock? I mean, they just voted for two sides that were against each other.
I think they did. I think they did not want Obama to have too much power. They saw his overreach after he was elected in 2008, and they voted away his power in 2010 and 2014 very wisely.
Go ahead, the economy is not so cinematically picture perfect. We know that. I didn't see gridlock on the ballot when I went into the voting booth. But here's the thing. We've got corporate cash stranded overseas, $2.5 trillion. We need better policies to bring that money back home. That's the cheapest stimulus of all.
Well, Rich, we have one suggestion as far as that goes from Donald Trump.
Well, I don't know. I don't know if I have any suggestions for Donald Trump in that I wish he would have a more a global view of this. I think that the problem with John Tamny's argument is that it ignores the global component, that we have enemies on the rise because they look at our dysfunction, which John says is a good thing economically, and they interpret it as weakness. And then EMAC just brings up a great point about taxes. You have to look at this in a global context.
Okay, final word from Steve. Go ahead.
You'll get consensus when you have a candidate who puts forth a positive Reaganist program for growth. Then the country will move again, and the Democrats will be making the compromises, not the Republicans.
All right. I'm sure Bruce agrees with that one, but unfortunately, we've run out of time. Coming up next, OPEC said it